I'm an expert at failure. You may be wondering why I'm smiling when I'm making such a statement, and that is simply because I've done the same thing with the word failure that I have with a few other words because I know how truly powerful words can be. There's a reason why this channel is called Incurable. Incurable. Inside me is the cure. I am able to use it to heal myself. So, symbolism, especially in words, has a very powerful impact. And that is why sometimes I purposefully choose to change the meaning of a word to me so that it represents. So, not only does it stop being something bad, but it becomes something good. And there's tremendous power that comes from being able to do that, or just deciding to do that, is because, okay, sure, negative words are negative, good words are good words, but instead of just using a positive word, by taking a negative word and readjusting its definition for you, it completely transforms the way that you see that word, and it creates something even more powerful than just picking a positive word would be, such as I did with incurable. It's an inherently very negative word, but by breaking it down and giving it individual meaning and then reassembling it, it completely changes the definition for me. And I've kind of done the same thing with failure. Because I've always been the type of person who likes to challenge myself. I don't like, not really, but I'm not motivated by money. Yes, it is very important, especially in situations where you can't work and things like that. It is a very essential part of life, and it is very useful in that sense. But I know that happiness does not buy that. Well, I screwed that up. I know that money does not bring happiness, and I've always been very aware and very clear that I much prefer being broke and being happy than being rich and being miserable. Not to say those are the only two options. I'm just saying it's always been very clear in my head the distinction between the two. Happiness, enjoyment of life will always come first. Nonetheless, I'm still a very responsible person, so I've never been in debt. I've never had to pay interest on anything. I've never run out of money. I've always been very careful on that front because then it just removes any pressure related to money. Sure, given everything I'm going through, I could have prepared more. It's impossible to know what's going to happen. And it just did not seem logical to, get an insurance policy that would cover me in a situation like this. Because it's like, hey, I'm still young, I'm healthy, I've always eaten well, I've always exercised. I should be good when it comes to most illnesses. But it turns out I was not. Anyway, that's not the point of this. I'm not trying to, diverge the theme of this video. The whole point is, I changed the definition of what failure means to me. And it's like, the more often that you're willing to fail, the more often that you will succeed. And people don't necessarily always understand what that means. It's like, let's say your average of success versus failure is 10% success, 90% failure. That seems like a huge amount of failure and a tiny amount of success. And a lot of people get intimidated by that and don't even try something if there's a likelihood they could fail, because they're like, I don't like how I feel when I fail. Doesn't make me feel good. So let's just not fail. Let's not even try. And then that, 10% success versus 90% failure, well, that number remains the same. And the less you try, the more failures you'll have because you don't try them. So naturally, it's impossible for it to work out. It's like, oh, you know what? I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to build my own business. And you just do nothing. Well, obviously you're going to fail. It's impossible for you to succeed unless you try. So the only way to increase that percentage between success and failure is to fail more. So it doesn't mean that percentage will change necessarily. It's probably still going to stay around 10% and 90%. However, because you're failing more, because you're trying more things, you will succeed at more things simply by the law of numbers. If you try 10 things, well, you're going to fail at 9. You're going to succeed at 1. If you try 100 things, well, you're going to fail like 990 of them. But you're going to, hold on. Did I throw up the math? I feel like I said the wrong numbers, but point is, just by being willing to fail, you can be much more successful, which seems counterintuitive because people are just programmed to being afraid of failure, afraid of rejection, afraid of anything within that realm. So most people just tend to kind of play it safe and not try things. And then they just get to a point in their life where they're just dissatisfied and they're like, what happened? I had all these great dreams and goals and objectives, and I just wasted my life. Like, what happened? Well, it's because you didn't take enough risks. You didn't fail often enough. And the reason why I say I'm an expert at failure is because, I did a lot of work on myself. And I failed at a lot of very varied, and varied also in terms of embarrassment levels. But every time I learned from that experience, and with every failure that I went through, that I experienced, it brought me that much closer to the next success. So not to say like, oh, I'm successful at everything. I'm super rich. I have like an amazing home and a beautiful wife. I mean, yes, I do have a beautiful wife, but she's not living with me yet. So it's like, it's not like I have this perfect ideal life. I mean, okay, yeah, there's also the cancer, but you know what I mean. Point is, I failed at a lot of things, but I've also succeeded at them. And even when I failed, I realized that I always learned something from that, something valuable from that, even from failure. And that's why I began to set the habit of trying to achieve seemingly impossible goals. So it's like, okay, you know what? I've never run a marathon. I want to run a marathon. I could just run a marathon and then I would succeed. But what if instead I decided to run an ultra marathon? So instead of running like the normal, I don't know what it is exactly. I think it's 42.2 kilometers. So I'm like, you know what? Let's try to run 100 kilometers. That way, anything beyond that point of the marathon is more than I would have accomplished if I set that as my realistic goal. So I much prefer trying something that seems unreachable and most likely failing, because I know that by doing that, not only did I get further than if I just set the realistic goal, but every once in a while, that 10% where I succeed will come up and I'll be able to accomplish something that I never even thought was possible. And it's that mindset that really started to really shift how I saw the world and it's how I saw failure. So it's like when you see failure in that definition that I just explained, well, it's not really failure because I went further than what my initial goal was. So even if I failed that extreme version that I set myself as a goal, I still accomplished more. I learned from the failure. So by definition, it's not a failure, it's a success. And that puts you in a situation where it's like, okay, hold on. If I try something and, let's say the example of the ultra marathon, it's like, yeah, okay, my goal is to run a marathon, but instead let me try to run a 100-kilometer ultra marathon, and then we'll see what happens. I tried, and yes, I did fail at the ultra marathon. I only ran 50 kilometers instead of 100 like I wanted to, but I still got to 50 kilometers as opposed to the 42.2 of a normal marathon. So I pretty much ran 8 kilometers more than I would have if I did not set that ridiculous goal of mine. So by failing, by setting myself up to fail, I taught myself something so valuable, and as a result of that, it can only be considered a win. So it's like, okay, it's impossible for me to fail because even in failure, I accomplish more and I learn more than if I just set a realistic goal. And then if I do succeed, well, I succeeded, so the end result is still the same. So it's literally become impossible for me to fail. So that's why I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm an expert at failure, but because I changed the definition of what failure means to me, it changes things. And that's why I come back to what I mentioned in the beginning, like the symbolism of words, the power of words. That's how you're able to use it. Since the beginning, I don't know why, but I never believed that I would die. There are periods where it's really, really intense and difficult, and I wish that I could. But I'm not the type of person to commit suicide. It's just not who I am. So I'm like, all I can do is suffer through it. Even if I give up, still not going to die any sooner. It's not going to end the suffering any sooner. Whatever is meant to happen is going to happen. So let's just let it happen. And that's why, even though it's like, yes, there's been ups, there's been downs, been painful moments, I've cried for many different reasons. And, when you go through the experience, it's difficult. But I've never had that fear of oh crap, I'm gonna die. Everything is hopeless. Like, yeah, there were difficult periods, but it's like there's always deep down that knowledge, even though I don't know why, even though it doesn't make sense, that I would survive. And because of that, no matter what happens, I'm always able to get through it because that sensation still remains. Now, I don't know if that sensation is going to end up being real or be a failure, a success or a failure. I don't know. We'll find out. But even if it is a failure, will have gotten much further than I had if I set a realistic goal, as the doctors suggested that I do, and accept my death. And I'm going to learn way more from the experience with this perspective than I would have if I just kind of believed everything the doctor said and, gave up. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I much prefer approaching this situation, approaching life in general, with this mindset. This mindset of, I'm not doing something just to do it. I'm doing something because it's going to teach me something. I don't know what that's going to be exactly. I don't know if in order to learn something I'll need to succeed. But every single time I failed, I always learned something very, very valuable from that. And that's why I say I'm an expert at failure. And that's also why I say I don't see that as a bad thing. So anyway, just thought I would share that. So thank you for watching. If you want to support me, instructions in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for being a part of my YouTube family. And since this appears to be my new outro, let's see if I missed the button.